You know what's great when gaming? A high frame rate. But in order to actually take advantage of that high frame rate and see the smoothness of a high frame rate, you need a high refresh rate. Even if you play at 1000 FPS, if you're on a 60Hz monitor, it's still gonna look choppy. So if you're someone who likes high frame rates, you should get yourself a 240Hz monitor, right? Well, wrong, according to the journalist we're gonna look at today who thinks 240Hz monitors are overrated. I swear, dude, gaming journalists just somehow manage to have the most brain-dead opinions of all time. And just wait until we get into this article. Basically, the reason they think a 240Hz monitor is overrated is because they have no idea how to use a monitor. But let's go ahead and get into this. I paid extra for a 240Hz monitor and now I regret it. I've been grinding ranked games in Marvel Rivals lately, and with my freshly built PC, I figured it was the perfect time for a monitor upgrade. I splurged on a 240Hz monitor, believing it'd give me a competitive edge. Turns out, it was more of a money waster than a game changer. Okay, but it does give you a competitive edge. See, 240Hz means your screen refreshes 240 times per second, whereas let's say a 60Hz monitor would refresh 60 times a second. So you're able to see more information on your monitor per second, meaning you have an advantage. This would especially be helpful in something like Marvel Rivals. However, of course, you need to have a PC good enough to actually reach 240 FPS, and trust me, we'll get into that. Since my old monitor was a 24-inch 144Hz 1080p IPS model, and I was quite happy with it, it only made sense to get a direct upgrade across all specs. I picked a 27-inch 240Hz 1440p IPS model, the LG, and I'm not even going to read all that out. It's worth noting that the monitor is currently on sale for $297, but I paid $400 due to local VAT and customs fees, which apply to all other monitors where I live as well. Unfortunately, I quickly learned that running games at 1440p is significantly more demanding, so reaching anywhere close to 240 FPS in most games, outside of older esports titles, requires high-end hardware. I have no intention of dropping over $3,000 on a new RTX 50 series GPU just to get closer to my monitor's maximum refresh rate. This is just a classic gaming journalism moment. How can you write about video games for a living and not know that 1440p is more demanding than 1080p? That should be common sense. Believe it or not, guys, this might be mind-blowing to you, but when you have to output more pixels on a monitor, it's going to be more demanding. But this journalist could go to their monitor settings and turn it to like, I don't know, 180, 150 Hz, because monitors that are like 240 Hz always have different settings like 144, 180, 150, 60, or alternatively he could set it to 1080p because monitors allow you to change the resolution as well. But expecting a gaming journalist to know how their own monitor they bought worked is too much in the year 2025 apparently. My new mid-range PC has perfectly reasonable performance for 1440p, as it's powered by an RX 6800 XT and Ryzen 7 7700. However, it just isn't powerful enough to run anything outside of older or lighter esports games at anything close to 240 FPS. Yeah, because it's a mid-range PC. I don't know if you realize this, but 1440p 240Hz, so 240 FPS, is what he'd be targeting. That's not mid-range, that's what high-end PCs go for. And Marvel Rivals is an Unreal Engine 5 game, so good fucking luck getting 1440p 240 FPS on that, without some sort of like frame gen. Ladies and gentlemen, here we have a gaming journalist surprised that his mid-range PC gives him, wait for it, mid-range performance. Who could have guessed? I'm getting around 100 to 120 FPS in Marvel Rivals at the lowest settings, and about 70 to 90 FPS in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which isn't even close to my monitor's 240 FPS maximum. A 140Hz, or rather 180Hz because 144Hz 1440p is hard to find nowadays, 1440p monitor could have done the same job just as well, and I would have saved over $100. Like I mentioned earlier, you can go over to your monitor and select 180Hz. But why didn't you run a benchmarking tool or something like that first, so you could see what sort of frame rates you can achieve at 1440p on your computer? Although modern frame generation like AFMF2 could take me closer to 240 FPS in some games, the generated frames just don't look and feel like real rendered frames. Plus, the additional input lag outweighs all the positive effects of higher FPS in competitive games. FSR upscaling is a more viable solution, but it still doesn't provide a frame rate boost anywhere close to frame generation. I actually agree with that 100%. I don't like using frame gen. 240Hz is overrated. Okay, so I don't just play the latest games. I'm still active on Battlefield 5. A game that was released in 2018, so my rig is more than capable of running it at a steady 240 FPS. It's a fast-paced FPS, so I should be able to notice the benefits when I'm diving with a bomber airplane, flicking as a sniper, or rapidly moving my camera around as an assault. While I can feel the 240Hz refresh rate as opposed to 144Hz, it's not nearly as noticeable as I expected it to be. I am quite sensitive to changes in frame rate, and I think I can tell the difference between something like 80 and 85 FPS. But the difference in-game hasn't matched my expectations. Who knows? Perhaps a mouse with an 8000Hz polling rate is the second part of the equation that'll make the difference more perceivable. It's also nice to know that I'm getting the benefits of 240Hz even if I can't always feel it. If you previously used a 60Hz monitor and upgraded to something like 144Hz or more, you know firsthand what a huge difference the added motion smoothness makes. However, 240Hz doesn't provide that same kind of gap. That's because most things out there are actually 60 FPS/60Hz. So when you go above what you're used to seeing all the time, it looks very different. However, there still is a noticeable jump from 144 to 240Hz, and I would know I have a 240Hz monitor. In fact, unless you're a pro gamer who plays at a competitive level, it's possible that you won't even notice the difference between 144Hz and 240Hz at all. I know this is hard for many of us to admit, so I suggest trying a super high refresh rate monitor yourself if you find an opportunity. Many budget gaming monitors on today's market have refresh rates like 160Hz and 180Hz instead of 144Hz, which further narrows the difference for those upgrading to a new monitor. Now for the rest of the article, they just go over other monitors that they could have bought that would be a better price. So I'm not going to cover that, but basically what this article boils down to is 240Hz is overrated because this journalist didn't do research and realize that 1440p is actually more demanding than 1080p. Anyway, I don't really have much else to say. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe. If you didn't, leave a dislike and a mean comment, and I'm out.